Hello and welcome back to another video, and today we want to take a look into a topic for which this channel was originally created. As some of you may know, I created this channel I guess some 3 years ago, and I originally wanted to talk mainly about the history of certain Germanic tribes. This was also the thing that I did at first on this channel, and I uploaded some videos, but as you may know by now, I unlisted these videos mainly because the quality of them was still, I think, much too bad to still show them to people. But right now I guess my video quality has at least slightly improved, and because of this I want to give it another try also on this subject for which the channel was mainly created. And this is what we want to do today, because I want to talk about the history of a Germanic tribe and specific Germanic peoples. And the tribe about which I want to talk today is a tribe which is from the ancient Germanic history. So just to set this in perspective, the people we will talk about today lived some, roughly 2000 years ago. And this specific tribe is interesting both from a linguistic perspective and also of course from a historical perspective. But let's start from the beginning. The Amsivari were a Germanic people which lived in what is essentially now northwestern Germany. And something that is quite interesting is that their name most likely came from the name of the river Ems. And the other part of their name, Vari, meant as much as warrior or man. So if you would literally translate their name, it would mean as much as warriors of the Ems River. And this is also in the English language kind of interesting, because you may see a certain similarity between the name of the river Ems and the river Thames. So the river Thames is obviously this large river which flows through England and through London. And the Ems River is, I think, in size even somewhat comparable to the Thames River, and it flows in northwestern Germany. And this name similarity is due to the reason that both the name of the Ems River and the Thames River actually originate from the same source, and this most likely came from an older Germanic word which was used to describe a dark spot or dark water. And this is most likely the thing that occurred both in the case of the Thames and the Ems River. The other part of the name, Vari, is actually also still connected to Germanic words which exist to this day, and an example in the English language would be the word warrior. So you can see a certain similarity, vari, vario. And in German you can also to this day still find a related word, which is the word Bewohner. So Bewohner is the German word for inhabitant, and especially the syllable Wohner still shows some similarity to Vari, although as you can see it is also not so close anymore. But now that we talked about the linguistic aspect of this tribe, we can start to take a look in the history of this tribe. And as it may be somewhat obvious, the Amsivari lived next to the Ems River. The Ems River also had a certain historical relevance at this time, because the Romans tried to conquer Germania between the years 12 BC to 1680, and one of the essential borders which they used to establish their structures in Germania was actually the Ems River. So the Romans tried to claim Germania up to the Elbe River, but they actually only really controlled in the time in which they were active in Germania, at least for longer periods, the area between the Rhine and Ems River. So the settlement area of the Amsivari was most likely located in the border region of the areas which the Romans actually controlled. Although they settled near to such an important landmark, their name only appeared in later records. And this might be evidence for the theory that the Amsivari only came relatively late under Roman dominance. Although not much is known about the tribe itself, there is actually a quite interesting biography which is connected to the tribe and therefore also the history of the tribe, at least to some degree. And this biography is about a lord which came from this tribe and led his tribe for a certain time and also fought during the wars in Germania on the Roman side. And something that is quite interesting is that this lord, which was called Bojocalus, was actually captured by the Romans in the time shortly before the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. And it is written down in Roman historiography that this was actually due to the reason that Arminius, who was at this time still relatively respected among the Roman militaries, actually advised to capture Bojocalus. So this seems of course somewhat paradox, because you need to consider Bojocalus later served the Romans. But at this time and shortly before the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, he was captured by the Romans. And this is often seen as evidence that Bojocalus actually was more loyal to the Romans than he was to Arminius. And that therefore Arminius used the trust that was put in him and also the authority he had to simply eliminate a rival which could have been a problem for his plans. Now at latest with the battle in the Teutoburg Forest, it became of course obvious that the real traitor to the Romans was not Bojocalus but Arminius himself. So this is also the point where Bojocalus was freed again by the Romans, and from this time on he and a loyal part of his tribe served under the Roman command in the fight against Arminius. Something that is quite often overlooked is also that the Roman war in Germania ended not with the defeat of the Teutoburg Forest, but instead Tiberius and Germanicus would still lead quite large wars in Germania. And in exactly this war, Bojocalus and his loyal part of the tribe also served. It is also quite likely that the Amsivari as a tribe were quite split in their loyalties. So some of them may have served the Romans and others likely also fought against the Romans under the command of Arminius. So it was likely a rather large sacrifice which Bojocalus undertook in fighting members of his own tribe. Although the Roman conquest of Germania failed of course, Bojocalus retook control of his tribe in the aftermath of the war, but the tribe itself, the Amsivari, were significantly weakened. And their neighbors to the northeast, the Chauci, recognized this weakness and put it to use for their own agenda. So they simply invaded the settlement area of the Amsivari and relatively easily defeated them. This was the case in the late middle of the 1st century AD. So Bojocalus had at this point served the Romans for some 50 years, so essentially half a century. And he therefore thought that it would be possible that he and the remnants of his tribe could get a new settlement area in the border region to the Romans. So the Amsivari actually tried to migrate in the borderland to the Roman Empire and to establish their new settlement area there. But to the surprise of Bojocalus, the result was not that they gained new land, which was at this point still uninhabited, but that the Romans denied them their claim on this land. The Roman legatus then presented Bojocalus an opportunity to get land, but only as a private person. So the tribe, the Amsivari themselves, would have been left to their own advice. And the problem which they had, that they didn't have any settlement area at this time, obviously would have remained. So Bojocalus refused to take land as a private person because he would have considered it, in his own words, as treason on his people. Bojocalus, who was at this point in time most likely an older man, was obviously very enraged by the fact that they wouldn't get any land from the Romans, although he served them for half a century, and then gathered certain tribes which were historically allied with the Amsivari and also had a difficult relationship to the Romans, to essentially form a war alliance and to wage another war against the Roman provinces at the border. So this obviously troubled the Romans, and they themselves mobilized several legions which were placed in the border region and also crossed the border to essentially break these other tribes out of the war alliance of the Amsivari. And they also succeeded in this. So the Bructeri and Tencteri, which were two of these tribes, and this was the point where this alliance collapsed. So although Bojocalus still stayed by his tribe, the war alliance wasn't anymore. So Bojocalus and his tribe now had no other choice than to leave the border region to the Roman Empire. The Amsivari then tried in the late 1st century AD, in a last feat of strength, to conquest land from other tribes. So they attacked several tribes in Germania and tried to get land from them, but they obviously failed because they were weakened during the wars before and at this time also had no settlement area, and yeah, it was just overall quite problematic. Roman scholars concluded at this point that the Amsivari most likely were simply lost in Germania and later assimilated into other tribes, but it is also seen as possible today that they later settled on a smaller territory which was located in the area of the Lippe River. But they most likely assimilate at latest in the 4th century in this area upcoming Franconian tribe. Something that is quite interesting about the history of this tribe to me is that you can actually see that it sometimes didn't even matter how lords of certain tribes placed their loyalties, if they either served Arminius or the Romans. In some cases, tribes were simply largely unlucky in the political constellation which occurred in the time 2000 years ago, and that loyalties and alliances also tended to shift quite quickly in this time. And this is something that is actually for some tribes quite typical in this larger context. So there were of course tribes which were more consistent in their alliances, but there were also those tribes which became something like a plaything of the powerful. And this is in my opinion to a large degree what happened in the case of the Amsivari and Bojocalus. Okay, but this would be all for today. I as always hope that you enjoyed the content of this video, and I of course also hope that you will watch the next video again. See you then!